A very warm welcome to new episode of Ink and Insights. It gives me immense pleasure to welcome globally renowned Pulitzer Prize winner author Kai Bird in my program today. Kai Bird is a Pulitzer Prize historian and journalist. He is the co-author of American Prometheus, The Triumph and Tragedy of J. Robert Oppenheimer, which in 2023 was adopted for a Hollywood blockbuster film, Oppenheimer. His most recent book is The Outlier, the Unfinished Presidency of Jimmy Carter, which was published in 2021. In 2017, he was appointed executive director and distinguished lecturer of Graduate Center's Leon Levy Center for Biography. Bird's another book, The Good Spy, The Life and Death of Robert Ames, a book that was published in 2014, was a New York Times bestseller. He chronicled his childhood in the Middle East in his memoir, Crossing Mandelbaum Gate, Coming of Age Between the Arabs and Israelis, which was a finalist for both the National Book Critics Circle Award and the Dayton Literary Peace Prize. He is the acclaimed author of biographies of John J. McCloy, McGeorge Bundy, and William Bundy. He won the Pulitzer Prize for Biography in 2006 for American Prometheus, which was co-authored with Martin Servin. His works include critical writings on the Vietnam War, Hiroshima, nuclear weapons, the Cold War, the Arab-Israeli conflict, and the CIA. Bird also won the National Book Critics Circle Award and the Duff Cooper Prize for History. It is such an honor to have him in my show. Thank you so much for your time, Mr. Bird.
Thank you, Sumit, for having me.
And it's so good to see you after so many years. I have had an opportunity to interview a few years back when you were in Nepal.
Yes, I miss Nepal. I consider it one of my homes.
Thank you so much. Kai, let me begin by asking, you have authored and co-authored multiple biographies. Why do you think our biographies needed?
Oh, biography is the best vehicle for conveying history, complicated history. I say it's the best vehicle because it's the most readable. It's accessible to the reader. Most biographies, read like a novel. But they're not fiction. They have footnotes, and biographers are very careful to pay attention to the footnotes. But we're trying to tell a story through the life of one person, famous or unfamous, that conveys along the way a lot of history about the life that was lived. And so I think it's the most powerful form of history, and also one of the more difficult, more arduous scholarship, because it's an unending treasure hunt for all the details of someone's life, which is, of course, impossible to be comprehensive, but it's an unending quest for detail.
Right. So, Kai, you have had an opportunity to look into the lives of many people, and in fact, very renowned people. And do you think, these great people who lived in certain point of time in the history, were they shaped by the narrative of that particular time, or were they influenced by the tides of those period of time?
Yeah, every life is lived in a particular time and place. So the biographer's task is to explain what's going on in that place and in that time. Robert Oppenheimer was born in 1904 in New York City. And so, we try to explain what it was like for him growing up in New York at that time. And along the way, you learn that though he was of Jewish ancestry, he was raised in something called the Ethical Culture School. And this is sort of an offshoot of Reform Judaism. It was sort of a secular religion.
Right.
And they taught their school children to pay attention to ethical problems, ethical quandaries, and to seek justice in the world and such. So obviously this had a huge impact on the young Oppenheimer. So
Right.
that's the biographer's quest, is to show that the time and place.
Right. And how about yourself? When did you really start writing, and what intrigued you into the this writing profession?
What intrigued me, what started me writing about biography?
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, I started out in my 20s as a journalist, actually writing for things like the Far Eastern Economic Review based out of Hong Kong, but I was freelancing in South Asia. So actually, some of my earlier writings are from the 1970s in the Far Eastern Economic Review, but reporting from Kathmandu.
Oh,
So,
wow.
and I was in my 20s. I was living very cheaply, traveling around India and Nepal and Bangladesh and Pakistan, and filing once a week a story about something or other, and from one of these places. But it taught me to write, and to write quickly. Um, and I then drifted. I worked at Newsweek magazine in New York in the late 70s, and then switched to The Nation magazine. And then in 1982, I wrote a book proposal for a biography of a powerful Wall Street lawyer named John McCloy. And, I thought it was going to take me 2.5 years to write that biography. And of course, it took much longer. It took me 10 years.
Oh my goodness.
So by the end of the 10 years, I was no longer a working journalist, and I had sort of drifted into the wonderful world of biography.
Right. Right. And had you thought that, you would receive a Pulitzer Prize in 2006?
I couldn't imagine it. No. So, no, it was, but, by the time I wrote the Oppenheimer book, by that time, I'd written uh, two big biographies, and then Marty Sherwin, my co-author on the Oppenheimer book, he had started working on Oppenheimer in 1980. He had signed a contract with Knopf in New York to do a biography of Robert Oppenheimer. And then he spent the next 20 years researching it. And in the year 2000, he came to me and suggested that I should join him on
Right.
his Oppenheimer project. And eventually I did. But it still took us, he'd done an enormous amount of research, but it still took us another 5 years to write and produce the book.
Right.
And my one regret in life at the moment is that Marty is no longer with us. He died in October of 2021, just 2 weeks after learning that Christopher Nolan was signing on to make a film based on the book. So
Right.
Marty knew about Nolan's project, but he didn't live long enough to see the film, which is a tragedy.
Yeah, absolutely. And I was kind of inquisitive and was wondering to ask you this. How did you choose to decide that you would write a certain biographies? How do you choose the individual that this is what you're going to work on?
Oh, well, you have to choose your subject very carefully, because, you're going to live with them for a long time.
Right.
Most biographies take at least 5 years. As I said, my first one took 10. My second one took 7 years.
Right.
Um, it's a big commitment. So you have to choose your subject carefully. You have to be really curious and obsessed about telling this story.
Sure.
So, for instance, my second biography was on McGeorge Bundy, who was the National Security Advisor to Kennedy and Johnson. And, I had gone to college in the late 60s and early 70s, and the war in Vietnam was still raging. And I was a rather angry young man about that war. I thought it was
Right.
crazy. And here was McGeorge Bundy, the national security advisor, who was one of the major architects of that war. And he actually came and gave a speech in November of 1972 when I was a senior in college
Okay.
in Minnesota. And I remember being struck by what a curious man he was. He was obviously very smart. He was an intellectual. He was a former Harvard dean.
Right.
And he got up and he gave a lecture in which he didn't, he didn't apologize for what he had done in Vietnam, and the war was still raging. And, we students thought he was a war criminal. And yet here he was standing in front of us, and he seemed to be a very liberal, intellectual, reasonable, articulate. And so I retained a curiosity after having seen him perform as such in 1972. And then years later, in
Right.
1992, literally 20 years later, I decided, my curiosity was still there about the Bundys and how they had gotten us into this war. So that was my motivation for doing that biography. I wanted to use the biography of Bundy to explain how America got into this war and why it was such a tragedy.
And how do you approach storytelling to engage and captivate your readers? Yeah.
Biographers are storytellers, so you want to be able to draw them into the life of the person you're describing with colorful stories. So,
Right.
I make a point of trying to start each chapter with an anecdote or a quotation, and also end each chapter with a story that gives the reader a curiosity about what is going to happen next.
And your highly celebrated work that you co-authored with Martin Servin, American Prometheus, that won a Pulitzer, is a biography of Robert Oppenheimer, renowned scientist who designed atomic bomb. What aspects of Robert Oppenheimer's life and story drew you to write American Prometheus?
Well, it's a story about a physicist, a quantum physicist who, yes, becomes identified in the popular mind as the father of the atomic bomb. And yes, he was chosen to be the scientific director of Los Alamos, the secret city that was built in New Mexico during World War II to develop specifically this weapon of mass destruction. So, it's the story about the dawn of the atomic age, which we're still living with today, of course.
Right.
But I remember Marty Sherwin at one point when we were writing, he turned to me and he said, Kai, you and I would not be spending all these years working on this biography of Oppenheimer if it was just a story about the development of the atomic bomb. What really
Right.
makes the story interesting in a personal way is what happened to Oppenheimer in his personal life. And it's specifically the fact that in 1945, he is hailed as America's greatest scientist. His
Right.
image is put on the cover of Time and Life magazine. And then just 9 years later, he's brought down. He's humiliated, and he's put on trial in this secret kangaroo court of a security hearing. And his private life is exposed, and his love life and his politics, and he's accused of being left wing and maybe a secret member of the Communist Party and maybe even a spy for the Russians. And his
Right.
loyalty is questioned, and anyway, in 1954, his life was destroyed. He
Right.
had been a major public intellectual, and after 1954, when he was stripped of his security clearance, and then the fact of this was leaked to the New York Times, he became a pariah, and he could no
Right.
longer speak out. And so it was a real tragedy. That's what makes his life so interesting, and that's what motivated Marty and I to spend 25 years together working on this biography, because it explains not only the atomic age that we live with today, but it also
Yeah.
explains American politics, the McCarthy era. And you can see the seeds actually of our very divisive politics here in America today with Donald Trump. Donald Trump comes straight out of the McCarthy era.
Right.
He was a direct product of that witch hunt. And so that makes the story really interesting. There's a triumph and then a fall, a tragedy,
Yeah.
Oppenheimer's life. And so that's dramatic, and it's has an arc to the story. So that's why that was what was compelling for Marty and I about Oppenheimer's life.
Right. That's very tragic, but nevertheless, congratulations on the success of your book, Kai, American Prometheus, as it has been adopted in Hollywood. And I also had, in fact, chance to watch the Hollywood adaptation of Oppenheimer in Kathmandu. I was thinking of you when I was watching that movie. How did you feel to see your work brought to life on the big screen, Kai?
Oh, it was astonishing. It's a 720-page book. It's a very complicated story. And several Hollywood types attempted to do this film over the years. The book came out in 2005, so 18 years ago.
Right.
And Marty and I had sort of given up that Hollywood would ever find a way to do this. And then along came Christopher Nolan. And in September of 21, he called me and said he was taking up this project and that he had already written a script.
Yeah.
And eventually, when I was allowed to read the script a few months later, it was an emotional experience. It brought back all the memories I had of working with Marty on the book, and because the script is very, it follows very closely the book, the biography. I could recognize whole lines and paragraphs of dialogue that were taken straight out of the book, scenes that were straight out of the book. And so it's a faithful adaptation. It's an amazing artistic achievement that Nolan was able to cover the high points of Oppenheimer's life and in a 3-hour movie.
Yeah.
And then when I had a chance to actually see the movie for the first time, Nolan flew me out to Los Angeles, and the next morning I was marched into a completely empty IMAX theater. And Christopher Nolan pointed to his favorite seat, which is right in the middle,
Right.
halfway up. And then he adjourned to the end of the aisle and gave me the privacy to watch this film all by myself. And it was an amazing experience to see. It's a transformation of the book into a different artistic medium. It's
Right.
a very different experience from reading a book, but I think Christopher Nolan's screenplay and Cillian Murphy's performance as Oppenheimer captures the spirit of
Exactly.
Oppenheimer's personality and his ambiguities and his doubts about what he was doing and his personal life and his politics. And so it's a very captivating story. I sat there watching the movie, and I was very moved emotionally. And I kept thinking, what would Marty Sherwin think of this scene or that? And again, it's sad that he didn't live long enough to have a chance to see this film.
Exactly. I mean, the movie was really captivating. I mean, in fact, the movie itself made $800 million in 6 weeks since it was released, and it was a huge success. Why do you think so many people were drawn to the lives of a quantum physicist?
Well, yeah, it is a sort of a surprise to me because I think particularly a younger generation of Americans or Nepalis or Indians probably have no idea who Oppenheimer is.
Yeah.
They don't know the history. If they knew anything, at most, it's probably that he was a scientist who was known as the father of the atomic bomb. But that's about it. And so, why would they flock to see a 3-hour film about this man's life? Well, I think the answer is that, we are living in a very dangerous world, a very chaotic world, a world of conflict. There's a war raging in Ukraine, between Ukraine and Russia. There's a war now in the Middle East. There are tensions throughout the world. And, we are living in the atomic age. And America was the first country to acquire the bomb, but Oppenheimer predicted in 1945 that there would be many other countries, even poor countries, who could acquire these weapons. And we are now living in a world where North Korea has the atomic bomb, and India, and Pakistan, and China, and Israel, and maybe tomorrow Iran. And so I think a new generation of people are, the film sort of reminds them that these weapons of mass destruction, these apocalyptic weapons exist out there. And we should pay attention. We shouldn't be complacent about living with the atomic bomb.
And do you think, Kai, that there is still a threat, the kind of threat that we had during the Cold War era, that is still prevails today?
Oh, yes, the threat is very real. Some people argue that since more than 75 years have passed since the last time an atomic bomb was used as a weapon in combat in Hiroshima and Nagasaki, that this means that the idea of deterrence has succeeded, and we don't have to worry. But I would argue that 75 years is a drop in the ocean of time. And if you understand human history, it's often one of conflict and accidental wars, unintentional wars. And in the long march of time, it's quite possible that if we don't take steps to regulate this weapon, to ban it, that like people banned chemical warfare after World War I, if we don't take steps to control this weapon, in all likelihood it will someday be used, and it could be used in a conflict like Ukraine. The Russian president Vladimir Putin has threatened to use tactical nuclear weapons there, and that's a very real and frightening prospect. But in addition, Oppenheimer warned against the possibility of non-state actors getting a hold of a loose nuke as such, or designing a dirty bomb. And this too is a real possibility that could, terrorists could acquire a weapon and use it. Because as Oppenheimer said, these are weapons for aggressors. They're not defensive weapons. They can't be used to defend your country. They're weapons of terror. They're designed to instill terror. And, in the first instance in Hiroshima, as Oppenheimer himself says in the movie and in the book, he explains that sadly this was a weapon that was used in the first instance on a virtually already defeated enemy, Japan.
So, are there specific aspects of Oppenheimer's life or character that you are particularly excited to see portrayed on the movie Oppenheimer?
Well, I was very pleased that Christopher Nolan understood that at the heart of the story is this kangaroo court, this trial, this security hearing that in which he was humiliated. And so, probably half the movie is devoted to explaining what happened to him in this 1954 trial. And that is indeed, I think, an essential part of the Oppenheimer story. And so I was glad that Nolan understood that and devoted so much of the film to explaining that. A film can't do what a biography can do. The film doesn't cover, you don't see any of Oppenheimer as a child. You don't see him growing up in New York City. But, a film can't do everything. And I think by focusing on the young Oppenheimer, his development as a physicist, and then the development of the atomic bomb at Los Alamos, and then what happened to him in the trial, that captures, the essence of the Oppenheimer story.
Perhaps a slightly different question, Kai. You have written biographies of powerful elite Americans and have come to know pretty closely how American society has evolved over a period of time. It could be a very generalized question that might require a lot of time, but nevertheless, how to see its current trends and future, Kai?
I'm sorry, the current trends of
Trends and future of how is American society evolving right now?
Oh, I don't know how I can begin to answer that question. It's, life is complicated, and any biography focused on one life is just a sliver of history. But that's precisely the power of biography. And I'm working on a new book now, a biography of Roy Cohn, who is not very well known, particularly outside of America, but he was a lawyer who was chief counsel to Senator Joseph McCarthy during the McCarthy witch hunts.
Right.
And he's a sort of legal scoundrel as such. And then after the McCarthy era, he became a lawyer to all 5 mob families in New York City. And then in 1973, he was at a private dinner club and met at the next table a young real estate developer named Donald Trump. And he became Donald Trump's lawyer. And he taught Mr. Trump everything he knew about how to deal with the press, how to always countersue, how to tell the big lie, how to not pay your taxes. So it's a very colorful story that I hope will explain the Trump phenomena. And but it's one life. But I think it will shine some light on America's current predicaments.
I know you are a very busy man. My last question for you would be, what would you like to advise for the aspiring biographers?
Oh, well, you should, the aspiring biographer should get up every morning and write just 350 words. Not much. Not much. But if you write every day a little bit and you tell stories and concentrate on the details of your subject's life and personality, day by day over a period of a few years, you might have a book. You might have
Right.
a life story to tell.
Thank you. Thank you so much for your time, Kai. It was such an honor to have you in my show. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you. It's been a pleasure.